As the temps start rising, I feel the familiar urge to refresh my closet, but I don't want to waste money on pieces I'll only wear once or for just one season. Thankfully, Quince changes that. Their clothes are timeless, lightweight, and far more elevated than anything else at this price. It finally feels like my wardrobe matches my standards. The best part is that Quince only works with factories that use safe, ethical, and responsible manufacturing practices and premium fabrics and finishes, so you get to look good while feeling good. I'm pretty excited that I have upgraded my athleisure wardrobe for this summer. I bought a sweatshirt and a pair of wide-leg flow pants that are two of the softest items I own, and I plan to live in them. So join me in giving your summer closet an upgrade with Quince. Go to quince.com/POTC for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/POTC to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/POTC.
In improvisation, we're doing as much unlearning as we are learning. So that first improv class is, don't judge yourself. Don't judge other people. Let's just like to be in this moment. Walk this room. Look at the other people in the eye. Say something silly. They're going to say something silly. And then you realize at a certain point, you've got synchrony with these people who were strangers 3 hours ago.
That was Kelly Leonard on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 3 clinical psychologists here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas from psychology to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act Daily Journal, the Act Daily Card Deck, and the upcoming book, Act for Burnout.
I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, a Boston-based clinical psychologist, assistant professor at Brown University, and author of the book, Work, Parent, Thrive.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, the Big Book of Act Metaphors, and the upcoming Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. I'm here with Debbie to introduce today's episode with Kelly Leonard. And I have to say, this is one of my favorite episodes because it was a little different from the things that we typically do. And I will admit, I was feeling a little bit starstruck because Kelly knows and has worked very closely with a lot of very famous and successful and funny celebrities. He talks in the episode about how his wife was roommates with Stephen Colbert. And, I think one of the reasons I really liked this episode is I've noticed that the older I get, the more I'm drawn to anything having to do with creativity or fun or humor. And I don't know if this is like an age thing or if it's because things in the world seem like they're getting progressively more dark. And so there's more of a longing. But Debbie, what did you think about the episode?
I was so starstruck too, listening to this, because some people I really admire in the comedy world, and I think comedy is really important and something that I enjoy, myself, as a way to find some humor in some of the hard things that we're going through in life lately. And I kept thinking, oh, now I'm like 4 degrees separated from Amy Poehler and Tina Fey. I know Jill, and Jill talked to Kelly Leonard, and Kelly Leonard is friends and colleagues with all of ththese people. So I had that response too of just, it was fun to listen to it from that perspective.
Yeah, I totally agree. And he is just doing the coolest stuff using improv alongside behavioral science and mental health. And, I think in our work, sometimes we see people use humor almost as an avoidance strategy. Like, I don't want to feel my pain, and so I'm going to make a joke instead. And what I loved about this episode is this is really the opposite of that. It's talking about the elements of improv and using humor as a way to promote well-being and psychological growth. And I just found it so interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's really interesting because humor can be, like you said, a distraction or avoidance thing. Sometimes it can be a defense, right? Where people are unwilling to look at something, and so they deflect with humor. And it can be used in a hurtful way, right? Like when humor is mean or snarky. But I actually also think that humor can really, you talk about this with Kelly in the episode, it can help us connect. It can help us take a new perspective on things. And I was thinking of this book that I read recently, and we featured it on our Psychologist Off the Clock book club several months ago, which, by the way, quick plug, if anyone wants to join us, we talk about all kinds of really fun books once a month. So check that out if you're interested. But the book I was thinking of is called Humor Seriously: Why Humor is a Secret Weapon in Business and Life. And it came out of this class that was taught at Harvard. And now these two women that wrote the book go around and talk about how to have humor, how to use it, for instance, in the corporate world, how to use it to connect with people. And I love this book because it made me aware, I think, of some of the psychological processes involved in humor, which really overlaps with your conversation today. And I was just thinking about how you have to really observe things. You have to be flexible. You have to be a little bit self-deprecating and paying attention, and that humor can be such a powerful tool and one that we can all hone in our lives and prioritize. And so it's kind of cool to I think about that connection between humor and comedy and improv and psychology and how the two go together. And I think there's a reason that they're doing this in the corporate world more and more. Kelly Leonard talks about that, and they also talk about it in Humor Seriously, that we can use it to tell a more interesting story, to build team camaraderie. And I think sometimes about the gallows humor when I worked in a hospital setting, that having that humor really helped us get through some hard things and helped us deal with some really difficult situations. And it helped us connect and feel like a team bond. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and there's a reason they say laughter is the best medicine. I mean, Is there anything that feels better than laughing? It's the best, right? And I really appreciated the element of improv specifically that involves ensembles. You know, it's related to exactly what you were just saying, is that connectedness, that togetherness. And, you know, in my episode with Mike Rucker about the fun habit, one of the things we talked about was having fun together, and, you know, just that sense of community that I think we all really long for and need. And that was a big element of this episode that I really appreciated. And even Kelly talks about how some of the most successful comedians to come out of Second City, where he's worked for decades, are those that he said they bring their troops with them, you know, the Tina Feys and the Amy Poehlers, and that so much of their success is really related to their kind of interdependence rather than, you know, kind of being solo acts, essentially.
Yeah, I just heard an interview with Eugene Levy, who has worked with the same people from that Canadian group for decades, and how
Christopher Guest.
Yes,
right?
Christopher Guest, Catherine
movies,
O'Hara. All those. They started their careers early, and they riff off each other, and they have fun together, and their careers have, you know, all been joined together for decades, and what a meaningful thing that is.
Yeah, for sure.
I had the thought when I was listening, I should take an improv class someday. And then I was like, terrified. No way, never. You know, but to me, that was a little...
same thought. It was like, too scary.
Too scary. Which made me think, maybe someday I should, you know. But I do think that it's interesting to think about that as like something that would be really a fun thing, and would have some real benefits, but also would be so terrifying to someone who has never done any such thing before.
Well, we've talked about having a POTC retreat. Maybe we need to make it an improv retreat. I am going to Chicago at the end of this month, and I'm going to go to Second City and take in a show, and maybe hopefully even meet Kelly in real life. But one of my favorite moments from this episode, if you listen through to the end, you'll hear that Kelly and I actually have this sort of life-changing shared aha moment that is something that, you know, I will take with me that will help me deal with some of those like scary kind of unstagey type moments. So we hope you enjoy this episode with Kelly Leonard. Hey everybody, it's Jill here, and I am super excited about my guest today. This one is a little bit different, and I think you are going to get such a kick out of it. Today, I am talking to Kelly Leonard, who is the Executive Director of Learning and Applied Improvisation at Second City Works. His book, Yes and, was published to critical acclaim by HarperCollins. Kelly has spoken at Aspen Ideas Festival, Microsoft, Twitter, TEDx Broadway, and has guest lectured at Stanford's Graduate School of Business and the Booth School of Business at the University of Chicago. He hosts the podcast Getting to Yes and for WGN Radio. For over 20 years, he oversaw Second City's live theatrical divisions, working with such talent as Tina Fey, Stephen Colbert, Amy Poehler, Seth Meyers, Keegan-Michael Key, and others. He and his wife, Ann Libera, were awarded the Creative Voice Award in 2019 by Arts Alliance Illinois. Kelly, welcome to Psychologists Off the Clock. Thank you for being here.
I am so happy to be here.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, I have to say, when I was reading your book, I am in the process of getting blurbs for a book I have coming out. And I was feeling very envious that you have a blurb from Stephen Colbert himself right on the top of your book. Yes, and.
Yeah, it helps when your wife was Stephen Colbert's roommate in college. That's actually not a bad place to start.
Oh my gosh, I did not know that. How funny. Yeah. Wow. And so is he funny? Does she say he was funny all the time or just when he's performing?
Well, luckily, Stephen was actually in my first cast when I became the producer of Second City in 1992. So we both know him quite well. And yeah, he's hilarious. He's also very serious. And the person you get and you see is not very different from the person who might be sitting in your backyard having a conversation. So, and that's the wonderful thing about a lot of the people who work at Second City. And I think it's because of their improvisational training that they just sort of learn to tap into their sort of authentic voice, and they don't need artifice. They don't need, they're very vulnerable, and they recognize that they're bringing a lot of themselves on stage. And that is a unusual quality. And I think it is maybe one of the reasons so many famous people have come out of Second City from 1959 to present day.
Oh, I was going to ask you that exact question is, what do you think it is about improv specifically that seems to really promote success for these particular people? And of course, I want to ask you about improv and behavioral science and psychology and all of that. But for the performers that you've worked with, it does really seem like so many successful performers, especially in comedy, have an improv background. And that can't be a coincidence.
It's not. And I think it is, you're honing your own individual comedic voice, which is the sort of professional training aspect of this. My wife just sent in her second book to Northwestern University Press, and it's called Funnier. And the title is based on, she runs the first ever BA in comedy writing and performance at Columbia College. So she's a tenured professor of comedy, every parent's nightmare. But the reason her book is called Funnier is that parents would come up to her at open houses and say, "Are you going to make my daughter or son funny?" And she said, "I can't make them funny. I can make them funnier. I can find that thing that they have, and I can get the most out of it." So that is one thing when it's just someone who's like on a lark, but it's another thing when it's Amy Poehler or Tina Fey, who she both taught. And then you recognize, oh, they can do so much more. So you have that aspect. But then this improv thing, that's the crucial part, which is you are taught that all of us are better than one of us. Your job on stage is to just make your partner look good and to save them. And if everyone is sort of operating in that environment, incredible things can happen. And I think one of the things that you'll notice with a lot of Second City alums is when they become successful, they carry is a bad word. They have a lot of other Second City alums with them, whether it's 30 Rock or Parks and Rec or Colbert's Late Show. They bring their people because their people speak the same language. And then other people are invited into that conversation and they learn as well. Like, oh no, we're actually, these sort of pro-social aspects of even just simple self-regulation that improvisation brings out in individuals. It's fantastic for great comedy, and it's probably even better for being a good human being.
Right. I mean, just think about the way the quality of our relationships could change, whether it's romantic relationships or friendships or parenting. I mean, I think about all the ways in which I do parenting wrong. And if I were able to,
all of us,
incorporate more of these elements of improv, this is a challenge I sort of set for myself is how can I think, and I'll have to ask Kelly, like, how might I be able to bring this to parenting? So maybe we can get to that in a minute. Because before we, I don't want to put the cart before the horse when we haven't even talked to our listeners about improv in general. I think certainly people know what this word means vaguely, but there are really quite a lot of specific elements that come into play with improv. So you've done this incredibly cool work, bringing improv, where it's not just performers performing, but bringing it into to the corporate world, the world of behavioral science, mental health. So I want to talk about some of those projects in detail. But before we do that, let's kind of orient our listeners. And I like one of the things you say is that traditional quantitative skills alone don't guarantee success in our work. And it's really the soft skills that you were just mentioning, listening and adapting to change and trust, that, this is really paramount to success in many different domains. And that this is really where improv comes in, that these skills can be learned.
Yeah.
So can you walk us through what these elements are?
Yeah. Yeah.
And a little bit about like how they can help us regular non-performer folk,
Sure.
like our listeners, in our own lives.
I think if we're talking about the root, so as people maybe understand Second City as a comedy institution, they certainly know the famous names that come out of here. We do, and we've done this since 1959, and we still do it. Our main product is our resident stage shows, which are 2 acts of scripted comedy primarily, that is followed by a third act that is improvised, and that's where we're making up the scenes and developing it. But everyone is trained thoroughly in improvisation, and that work, the sort of origin story of that work, I think, is important to understand if you're going to sort of see why its impact is so big. So in the 20s and 30s, there was a woman by the name of Viola Spolin, and her job, she was working at Jane Addams Hull House on the south side of Chicago, and she was a social worker. And her job was to better assimilate immigrant children coming into her care. And she had studied with a woman named Neva Boyd, and they developed all these improv games that the kids would play, many of which were in gibberish or silence because the kids didn't always share language. And the games would bring them together to empathize and communicate and collaborate. And her son, Paul Sills, was studying at the University of Chicago. He loved these games, and he taught them to his friends, people like Mike Nichols, Elaine May, Alan Arkin, Barbara Harris, among others. That group forms the first improvisational theater in America, called the Compass Players, in 1957. That morphs into the Second City in 1959.
Wow. So it's like what started as an icebreaker turned into this kind of phenomenon.
Yeah. What was social work, looking at children from all these, these kids were not, these are immigrant children coming to a new country, probably escaping some really difficult situations.
Yeah,
and it's
with
funny,
trauma histories.
Exactly, trauma history. And one of my well-worn phrases about our work is no one got into comedy because they're well-adjusted. So, and
we say the same thing about mental health.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. The well-worn me search concept.
Right, exactly.
So then you translate these games and these exercises, and indeed they create incredible ways that people can co-create and collaborate together and create incredible comedy. And then what we recognized over a period of time is they also produced these high-functioning ensembles. And I think, again, it's not like we had the same casting director from 1959 to now. It's not like even any of the same people. I'm one of the old guard, and I started here in 1988. It's just not that through line. But what it is the pedagogy. What it is the ideas around the work, and the recognition that there were some very good people who did the work here, who really didn't catch on. And some of them became famous. I'm not going to name names, but they weren't real good at improv. They weren't really good at sharing the stage. They didn't collaborate well, and they might have become famous. But what they didn't do is the thing that you see with Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Amy Poehler, Seth Meyers, all those folks, which is like, oh no, they bring their troupe with them. They ensemble behaviors. I don't know if you just saw that.
Plays well with others.
Plays well with others. Thank you. Yeah. Tina Fey and Amy Poehler are going on tour. They're going to do at least what's starting as a 4-city tour. And I'm like, this is great. They're getting the band back together. And
that's amazing. I didn't know that.
That just got announced yesterday. So I think, it's not, when you know the story, when you know where this started and the places it's gone, it isn't as surprising to people. And I like that we're a best kept secret. To me, the fact that we're allowed to marinate for a few decades inside the work meant it wasn't co-opted into something else, because I have a friend, Neil Stevenson, who worked for IDEO for a long time. And we have this sort of mutual theory that once you cement a concept, let's say something like design thinking, and I love design thinking, and I think it's important, but it becomes sort of like a fad, and then people move on to something else. Like improv's improv. Improv is making it. It's not. There's nothing faddish about it. This is what it was ages ago, and it's what it is now, and it's going to be what it is later. And hopefully, we might discover more nuance and other ideas around it. But basically, at its core, it's like, how do human beings best collaborate together? And the wonderful thing about then working with the academic community is when you're like, oh, the science lines up with the thing we do. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about some of the main elements and then some
Sure.
of the specific games? So of course, probably the one everybody's familiar with and is the title of your book is Yes and.
That's right.
So explain what that means.
So I think the when we first taught this exercise, my wife was leading an executive ed program at University of Chicago with Richard Thaler. And for people who don't know Thaler, he wrote the book Nudge. He won the Nobel Prize in economics. Also a very funny human being who was part of our friend Adam McKay's film, The Big Short. And Thaler was so funny because he's like, wait a sec, yes and is a nudge. So the thing that we know from behavioral economics is that people's default position is to say no or do nothing. And the idea around yes and is like, okay, if that is our default, we need to practice not making that our default. So the exercise itself that we teach people is we gather two people together, and usually there's a number of these folks, but person A, person B, and we're going to celebrate a reunion in a year of this amazing time we spent together. Person A, you're going to pitch your ideas for the reunion to person B. Person B, you're going to respond to every idea with the idea of no, in as many different ways as possible. You can say no, you can say other things, but no, you're negating everything. And they do that for about a minute. Not terrifically fun for person A. If person B is a masochist, they might enjoy that. Then we switch places and person B pitches. And person A, their cue is to respond yes, but. And it's funny when after we do this for about a minute, we're like, okay, who liked that better? Usually half the room. Who liked it worse? The other half of the room. And we say, yeah, because you're hearing a yes, but there's a but there. And this is just a no with a bow tie. It's a no with a top hat. It's not like you're not really getting a yes. You heard a yes. It wasn't a real yes. And then the third round, we say everyone has to yes and each other's ideas. And we indicate that don't think about budget. The laws of gravity aren't involved here. And so, yes, like you're seeing Led Zeppelin on the moon while you're eating sushi. That's great. What we understand from a creative point of view, when this stuff is applied at Second City in developing material, that we will judge ourselves, we will judge others, and that gets in the way of creativity. When we lose that, and when we're truly creative, all these amazing ideas can come up, seemingly bad ideas. But if we let those exist, even for 5 minutes, really incredible things happen because, let's just say this, what truly innovative idea didn't seem crazy?
Yeah.
They all
true.
did because they're innovative by nature of them being innovative. They haven't been done before. Yeah. And this bricolage that happens when you take one person's idea, another person's initiation, you build on it, you yes and, is you end up in some really sort of exciting places. I'll even say that, let's take this a step further. What we know is even if you're trained in this, you're still going to block yourself. Doesn't matter. It's what human beings do. So we have a director, Mick Napier, who created a wonderful part of the creative process at Second City that he called Taboo Day. And the idea he gives to everyone is there's usually six writer performers who are coming in. He says, your job is to come in with 3 ideas each that there's no way that Second City would ever allow to be put on their stage. It's either financially, it's too offensive, it's like whatever. Doesn't matter. Can't go on. They won't let it. Invariably, those ideas end up in the next show. Because we do it to ourselves.
I love it. It's like a paradoxical intervention.
Yeah, well, it's again, it's the practice of divergent thinking. I mean, you can intellectually have the idea. This is the me search point. Like you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't know how to put it into practice in these unique ways, if you don't know how to upset the own way of a pattern that looks at you, which is very hard to do, then you're not going to get to this sort of unique alternatives. So Second City performers are trained in this, but even those sort of professionals need to find their world upset. And often the audience does that for them, because we come to the audience for suggestions and they ain't trained. They are going to say the thing they're going to say, and we're going to need that because this is a thing. It's a very pure art form. There are no plants. People always think there are because they can't believe that these people are just making it up. They're making it up. They're that good.
Yeah. It's so cool. It's like brainstorming on steroids, but where you're really taking the editor, the filter, the judger, the self-consciousness, all away, and then seeing what can kind of bubble to the top from that.
As a group. And one of the unfortunate things about the science in this area, which is we don't have good research, because the idea of studying 6 people who do this for 2 years and how adept they are, it's just not a big enough size. So I got into so many arguments with Nick Epley and some of the other scientists at the University of Chicago, like brainstorming doesn't work. I'm like, all right, when you collected your 5,000 people who don't know each other for this, 5-minute exercise, of course it doesn't work. But when you looked at the championship Chicago Bulls, or you look at like these Second City ensembles, there's or great bands that have stayed together. There's incredible things going on there because they've sort of learned a different kind of language and they have a different attitude sort of as they go together. So one of the things we're really trying to pitch, and hopefully we're going to get there with some of our academic friends, is study us. Study the 6 performers over the course of a year, creating in front of audiences. We tape every one of these shows and every one of these improv sets because we want to refer to it over time and see what is that interplay and what's happening that is unique to these folks that then anyone could take into their own world, because we're just talking about making something out of nothing, which is what most of us have to do in our jobs every day.
Right. Well, and so much of what you talk about as being important, in addition to the yes and piece, is this idea of the ensemble, that you're learning to work in groups, that, the idea of co-creation. I think in the book you say dialogues push stories further than monologues, following the follower, listening, and as opposed to waiting to speak. I mean, so many of these things they're interpersonal.
That's right.
Kinds, right? Interpersonal dynamics and I love the fact that you use the word ensemble. And I think you even talk about how you specifically don't say team, because team more suggests competition, like you're playing against someone, whereas an ensemble is really all about cooperation. Is that right? That's
totally right. And I had just interviewed for my podcast, Ben Ramalingam, who's got a new book called Upshift, Turning Pressure into Performance and Crisis into Creativity. And he's a guy who's done a lot of work with the Red Cross. I think that's where he's going for his next job. And one of the studies he points is in the 1990s, Henry Mitzenberg studied orchestra conductors with regard to their ability to lead. And it was this sort of counterintuitive idea, especially at the time, maybe less so now, of top-down leadership, because they're silent. And they're sort of leading silently, but they're also all about getting out from that group a certain kind of flow. And yes, it's individuals, but it's individuals together. So, and I think the research around groupiness is also important here. So we've all heard the phrase, your team is only as good as its weakest member. And Sheldon Patinkin, who is one of our, not a founder, but pretty close to that, used to say, well, in our work, your ensemble is only as good as its ability to compensate for its weakest member, because one of us is going to be the weakest member at a certain time. So if you're having a problem with your computer, please do not call me, call my wife. But if you need a really good bottle of wine, I can order it for you because I know how to do that. So we each have these sort of skill sets. And wouldn't it be wonderful in corporate America if, rather than saying, yeah, you don't know how to do a deck, you need to learn how to do a deck, we say, you know what Kelly's really good at? Coming up with 25 ideas for the deck that then Jenna can put together. So it's a matter of assessing sports context for people, which is like, you would never, if you're filling out a batting order for baseball, like just have power hitters 1 through, it just doesn't make any sense. You've got a leadoff hitter who's got some speed, you've got someone else, and you move them around, of course, because there's a recognition in this professional sort of creative environment that all these people bring different kind of skill sets. And we know this across arts, we know this across sports, we know it in so many domains, and yet it's ignored. It's ignored in business. And I think it to some degrees in academia, not completely, but certainly in business. And that's one of the things that I think it's the main reason that a lot of businesses tap us, is because they're like, how can we be thinking differently? How can we allow our people to be thinking differently? And it does come down to people and systems. It comes down to like, well, what have they learned? What do they not learn? What do they need to unlearn? And then what system are they operating in? And does it contain things like psychological safety? And oh, by the way,
Right.
do you know what psychological safety is beyond the bumper sticker?
Yeah. Right.
Because it's not just about like feeling good. It's a safe place for failure and
vulnerability
and minority voices to speak up. And if they don't feel safe, it's not safe.
It's not safe. Yeah, absolutely. My dad is an entrepreneur, and he wrote a book that was like all these kind of little lessons. People would ask him for advice all the time. So he thought, maybe I should write this down. And so many of these little things have stuck with me. And one of them, I mean, it's very common sense, but still, I don't know that we necessarily follow it, is know what you're good at and find great people to do the rest. And I think that's really a lot of what you're saying. And one of his strengths was retention. People didn't leave his company very often. And I think that's because even if he may not have described it as this kind of ensemble thinking, I think that's exactly what was being achieved by figuring out, what is everyone's strength and how do we maximize that to have an effective ensemble in the office.
And I think this is where we mistake ideas around play, purpose, meaning, culture. They all feel very soft. And it's like, you know what? Culture is happening in your organization, whether you're doing anything about it or not.
Yeah.
So do you think you should be doing something about it? And like, who is going to answer no? And then you have to answer like, well, what are you doing about it? And if you're telling me it's the poster you put up in the break room, then I am telling you you're not doing anything.
You're missing the mark.
We had a moment, there was a moment that I experienced. A colleague, and we got bought recently. So Second City got bought, and the new owners were coming for a visit. And my colleague and I were taking them on a tour, and my colleague saw a piece of garbage on the floor and picked it up and threw it out. And later we talked to them about so many different things, and we're talking about all the different things. And I remember later being told that was the moment that they said, oh, the culture seems okay here.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, and that story that gets told in so many business books, when Kennedy was walking through doing a tour of NASA, and he saw a maintenance worker sweeping and said, what do you do? And said, well, I help put people on the moon.
Love it.
It's the best. It's like, yeah,
it
no,
is
I mean,
the best.
And I started here as a dishwasher, and I was never, I never felt less than. People like Harold Ramis, who would come and visit, would talk to me, and not just talk to me, like hang with me, and then
treat
the
you like a
actors on
human
stage,
being.
yes, and a colleague and a partner, and it's like, and everyone sort of felt like that, and it was like, oh, that seems important. Let's not lose that, and hopefully that's the thing I know I fight for here all the time, and I think we still have it, because you just want everyone to sort of feel like, if you feel like you understand the idea behind the idea and the why and the purpose, this idea of the magic that's involved with making everyone laugh at the same time, who doesn't want to be a part of that?
Yeah.
That's the coolest thing ever.
I want to talk a little bit about the research piece of things in behavioral science and mental health. So when I was doing research for our interview, I was actually surprised that there were a fair amount of peer-reviewed journal articles looking at the impact of improv in mental health. And so some of the things I found, it's been used to effectively treat anxiety, depression, social anxiety specifically, intolerance of uncertainty, caregiver burden, and depression. And it's also been shown to promote divergent thinking, affective well-being, speaking confidence, and self-esteem. And I think that was just the first page of the return in my search. So you developed a program with your wife, Ann Libra, in partnership with Caring Across Generations. So this was to investigate the impact of improv on caregiver burden and depression. So tell us a little bit about that. I found this to be fascinating.
Yeah, the origin story is funny. Second City caught on fire, and this was soon after I sort of stepped down as a producer and didn't know what I was going to do next. And we were in these terrible temporary offices. It was Regis, and I got in trouble. Well, we got in trouble, but it was particularly me for laughing too much. And this was the receptionist. I think they were anti-joy. I'm not sure, but didn't seem like a winning philosophy to
that
me.
happened to me in grad school too. Okay. I got in trouble for laughing too loud. And then the next week I got in trouble for not smiling enough. So you're in a pretty toxic environment when this is the kind of feedback that you're getting. You knew you had to get out of there when you were told you were laughing too much.
Happy to talk about the gender dynamics because I understand all that. Yeah. So I'm in this terrible office and I get a call from Adam Grant. So folks know Adam at Wharton. He's interviewed me for a number of books that I'm not in. So I don't know if my particular stories aren't interesting enough, but we have good conversations that, whatever, I'm not in an Adam Grant book. But he had a friend moving to Chicago. Her name was Ai-jen Poo, who ran this group called Caring Across Generations. And he asked if I'd have lunch with her. And of course, yes. And we had just started this collaboration at the University of Chicago called the Second Science Project that looked at behavioral science through the lens of improvisation. And my wife, Anne, led a weekly lab. Actually, it was, a couple times a week. And it would be improvisers and social scientists. And sometimes they bring in phenomenon. Sometimes we would. Sometimes we were creating executive education programs. We actually ended up creating orientation programs that are still being used for undergrad, grad, and the law school actually uses them still. That basically are like, how do we embody the practice that is going to also tie to the research? Whether it's individuation, self-regulation, any of these phenomena, we did a lot. And I had been up at the university observing one of the workshops when I went to meet Ai-jen. I failed in that I didn't do a ton of research on her. Kind of glad I didn't because she's so impressive as a human and her credits.
But have been a little intimidated.
I would have been intimidated, though that's not the way she rolls. And I said, as I sat down, do you want to hear about my day? Because maybe there's a starting point. And I just told her about the work we were doing. And she's like, Kelly, this is like what we need in the caregiving space where there is no training for these people in these human to human situations. And in particular, what you're talking about is a lot of like listening work and a lot of empathetic communication work. And I introduced her to Anne. We hit it off immediately and her team was so great. And then when we debuted the idea at Aspen Ideas Festival. So Anne, myself, and Ai-jen, we were talking to David Leonard from the New York Times, and we did a sort of a mini workshop. And that's when our friend Ruth Allman from the Cleveland Clinic found us and was like, I'll fund the first phase of this. So we ended up creating an improvisation for caregivers program that's still running. And the research around it has shown, as you sort of alluded to earlier, this reduction in burden. This idea that people feel more agency in these situations because, look, we don't control the situations we're in. The only thing we have control of is our emotional response to them. Mm-hmm. And that's easy to say, of course, but when you can practice the idea of like, all right, let me not go to shame. Let me not go to fear. Let me just stay in this moment. Let me try in this moment to just sort of exist and take what's come to me and sort of yes and it. And we have a phrase in our work: you need to play the scene you're in, not the scene you want to be in.
I love that.
And I think for the work in this program was so powerful. And then of course Anne and I dealt with this when our daughter got diagnosed with cancer. And we're in these hospital settings and we're like, oh, I guess we got to do our stuff because we were terrified. And we were not just frightened, right? I mean, it's everything. And our ability to draw on that work. And one of the things that we drew a lot on the work we were doing at University of Chicago, in particular, Nick Epley's work around individuation and the idea that human beings tend to not want to actually reveal a lot of detail about themselves. And he has studies actually where they sent people basically strangers on a bus. They sent them out there to start conversations with strangers. They measured how effective they thought those conversations would be, and everyone thought they'd be terrible, and they weren't. And they were, in fact, very positive. And so we took that work at the University of Chicago and turned it into exercises. And then, so when we were in Nora's hospital room, and, you got so many different caregivers, like new nurses, surgeons, whatever they're coming in, almost every single one of them, they'd walk in the room, and I'd say, I'm Kelly, this is Anne, this is Eleanor, she also goes by Nora. We've both worked at Second City for 30 years, and we have a 100-pound Bernese mountain dog named Benchley, who's an asshole. Who are you? And then they would tell us, because to not respond in some level of detail. And so suddenly it wasn't like I'm seeing the kid with cancer. I'm seeing Nora, and Nora has parents, and those parents have a place that they work. And it all sort of comes together. And it's like, and our exercise when we do this is not that. It's how people grocery shop. Just describe how you grocery shop. And guess what? It's going to be filled with rich, weird detail that is going to tell me so much about you that I wouldn't have understood if it was just this is how human beings grocery shop. So that.
So tell me in a little detail. So when in the article, it was 6 2-hour weekly sessions, and each week was focused on a different theme.
Yeah.
So can you give an example or two of some of the specific exercises, and then because you would do the exercises with the participants and then do a debriefing afterwards, so they would understand how what they were just doing is meant to generalize to their role as a caregiver. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that, one of the exercises and how that applies to the different theme related to caregiving?
So I'll give you one that's sort of an introductory exercise that we've used a lot, and it's called I Am Somebody Who. So you gather this group in a circle, and the idea here that you're drawing on, which is we make a lot of assumptions about other people very quickly, and those might be wrong. In fact, most of them are wrong. So I Am Somebody Who is where you have the leader sort of say to the group, okay, I'm going to announce attributes. And when I announce an attribute that you recognize as something that is true for you, move to another part of the circle. And it starts with, I am somebody who identifies as a man. I am somebody who identifies as a woman. I'm someone who identifies as non-binary. I am somebody who identifies as religious. I am somebody who owns a gun. I am somebody who, and goes on and on. And suddenly, the vegan owns a gun? And it becomes this and I'll relate it to another thing that my friend Heidi Brooks, who's a teacher at Yale, she told me about this exercise that she started using with new cohorts. So when she would have a new class come in, she would hand out a blank piece of paper and a pen. She goes, don't sign your name. Just write down some pain that exists in your life. And then she would gather all those and read them out one by one. That changes the room. Yeah. That makes that group an ensemble. And so these sort of kinds of nudges, so we do it in a certain kind of way of these attributes, other people do it in these other ways, but it's all about how do I get this group of people to understand that we can all be here for each other, that we all sort of contain multitudes, that we might be capable of surprising each other. Because I think the thing that we learned in the caregiving space was the burden is real. And the burden is felt, the sense of being alone in the burden is so powerful. But we are not alone.
Right. It's kind of creating that sense of common humanity that's part of in our field, in the work of compassion, self-compassion and compassion-focused therapy, this idea that, the word compassion means to suffer with, and that to be human is to know pain, and that is something that we all share, and how healing it can be to recognize that.
Yeah. And I think that one of the really powerful things that came out, and there's a paper coming out next year on this. It's taken a while because we're doing more studying on it. But when we did the yes and exercise, the scientists were like, that's great. There's actually research that can support, as we mentioned, in behavioral economics and research around gratitude. But then they said, but what happens when you can't yes and the person, when you fundamentally disagree with their position, but you kind of need to stay in the conversation? That happens all the time. And we didn't know, and they didn't know. But what we came up with over the course of a few months is this idea of thank you because. And so the idea is if we need to stay in this conversation with someone we don't agree with, we thank them for their information, which does set off the gratitude part of the brain. And then we find anything, no matter how small, the because of something we agree with. And the example I use is a real one. When our daughter got sick, she had friends, a particular friend whose parents were anti-vax, well before it became fashionable. Mm-hmm. And we wanted the kids to stay in conversation, and we didn't want to be at odds. And so I used thank you because I said, thank you, because you care so much for your girl. You don't want her hurt by these vaccinations. I care so much for my girl. I don't want her hurt by someone who's unvaccinated. The thing we care about is our girls.
Is our daughters. Yeah. Oh,
and
that's really amazing. Yeah.
And it worked. They were able to sort of communicate in fax, or not fax, but text and FaceTime and those sorts of things. So, and I think for our audiences today that we're speaking to, this is such a poignant message because we live in a time where there's the words are all about canceling, and the words are about blocking, and we're very tribal. And what does it mean to sort of take a beat to provide a thank you because? And what I've discovered when I've done this is people that I normally disagree with, let's say politically, because that's probably what everyone thinks about is the political disagreements, right. That I end up agreeing with these humans on a lot more other issues. And there's space, and there's space for dialogues. To your earlier point, if we're trying to get away from monologues, we will move to dialogues. We have to be in conversation. And guess what?
Right. And I think we have we're more alike than we are different, but we get so focused on the difference that it seems like it's everything. But these kinds of thank you because or yes and conversations really open up kind of a larger repertoire for understanding.
Well, this is Dan Gilbert's work, right? And one of the things, I think he says this in Stumbling Upon Happiness, which is if an alien came down to Earth and interviewed one person, they'd understand 90% of humanity. That's how much we share.
Yeah. So you also teamed up with researchers at University of Chicago, one of whom was Ayelet Fishbach, who I interviewed on the podcast for her book, Get It Done. She was lovely. It was such a nice conversation. And so that was another one where you were investigating the efficacy of some of these practices. And I want to quote you. There was a quote in an article I read that I just loved. You said, "What I think we're building is an ever deepening and robust practice where the arts can speak to the science and the science can speak to the arts." And I loved that so much. So can you describe some of the exercises you did when you were doing the research at University of Chicago and what some of those findings were?
Well, the big one for this study, and as you know, and I learned as I started to work in academia, especially at a place like University of Chicago, which is they need the phenomenon to be hugely specific. We're going to study this one thing. Yeah. It's like, oh no, we have so many things. But in this particular case, we worked with all the new improv students who were coming into Second City. So hundreds of people who were just starting their work here, and people who are doing that, especially in the beginning classes. It's not just folks who want to be on Saturday Night Live. This is like everyone. It's just people who maybe want to reskill. They just went through a breakup. Who knows? They're all here for different reasons. And half the group were given just the regular instructions to this improv exercise. But the other half were given a prompt. And they were told that this is going to be uncomfortable. That's okay. Basically as simple as that. And what we discovered is that the people who were simply given that prompt, they had more success with the exercise. They stayed in it longer. They were objectively doing kind of more interesting work because we taped everything. And then Ayelet and her partners, her co-authors brought this to other places. But this sort of profound, simple idea of, can we just tell someone that this thing is going to be uncomfortable and that will help them succeed? It's revolutionary in how small it is, but also if you look back at your life and the way you entered the workforce, or no one told me something was going to be uncomfortable, and to stick with it.
No. Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, it's so powerful. And my co-hosts and I do a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. And actually I have a couple colleagues who have brought act and improv together. So I actually did a workshop at one of our conferences that was all about act and improv that was awesome. And so they take the core elements of acceptance and commitment therapy and kind of layer it together with improv. And I think what you're talking about here and what Ayelet's findings at least partly represent is the idea of willingness or acceptance. Or, the way I put it to clients is it's just getting comfortable being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's like, if I'm willing to make space for discomfort, because most of the stuff you do that matters is going to come with some level of discomfort. If you're willing to make space and have that, and your only response is not just to dive for the comfort zone to avoid pain, then it really expands your options for what you can do if you're willing to do. It's basically doing something that's hard as opposed to just this like path of least resistance.
There's a great quote that my friend Scott Barry Kaufman introduced me to from Irvin Yalom, who's, as I learned, is the best. But he said, sooner or later, you have to give up the hope for a better past.
Yeah.
And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And it's this, again, when we're talking about what it means to be present, it's giving up that. And I know my own experiences in therapy, which have been hugely important, were a lot about, I'm so trained in this work, but it doesn't matter that I'm trained in this work. I am still, trying to change a thing that happened ages ago, and I can't. And it doesn't mean you don't. It's not living in a non-reality. The reality is, of course, still there. But if I can tap into my pure present, and again, be fiercely present in the moment with the person who's across from me, I am going to be in a place where, I can do work from here. And I can potentially do like nicely successful work from here. That is, and this is here's the thing that's fascinating. I hired talent at Second City for over 2 decades. And as part of that, in the audition process, we would see thousands of people day one. So auditions take over a week or so, but the first day is like, hey, just groups of 12 come in, and we're whittling down and this sort of thing. It was, with almost 100% accuracy, I could tell who was not going to survive the audition by the way they walked on stage.
Wow.
It's just, they were in their heads, they were sweating, you could just tell. And then these other folks who would just sort of walk up sort of effortlessly or looking around or sort of being in the room. And that becomes less interesting the farther you go with that, the distinction between who's going to be great or who's not. But just in the very beginning, those tells were so very apparent. And I think that is widely true for all us human beings when we're navigating things that are unusual or complex or difficult to comprehend.
Or important to us. Like those 1,000 people that were going to get on that stage wanted that so badly.
So bad. So
right?
bad.
And the more you want it, the more you're going to feel imposter syndrome and self-doubt and fear and all those things. And like you were saying, it's like you can't control that stuff shows up. You can only control how you respond to it. And, what my hypothesis would be if I were to try to differentiate the successful from the non-successful is, our main goal in ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is building psychological flexibility. And what that means is our ability to be in the present moment, fully and without defense. Aware of all our thoughts and feelings, open to them, observing them, but not letting them drive our choices. What drives our choices is our values, who and how we want to be in the world. And I would bet that even though the people that you could spot up, coming up on stage, they may have looked like they were more confident. I would bet my life savings that they still had self-doubt and imposter feelings and negative thoughts and fear, right? They all had the same experience. Yeah. It's the ones that were able to allow the space to just let it be and still move forward with their behaviors rather than getting hooked by their thinking or trying to avoid or resist their feelings. That's probably a big piece of the difference. And both what makes people more successful when they're doing improv, but also I wonder if it's also what improv promotes.
That's it. No, you're nailing it.
Yeah.
So you do public speaking, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As do I. I get nervous before I speak publicly. Of course you do. Like,
Of course you do.
Do you seriously
Because you
not
care about being competent, not looking like an asshole. Yeah.
Exactly. And I remember my buddy Allison Wood-Brooks at Harvard. She's like, all right, Kelly, I got a technique for you. Because she's like, this is just very funny to me that you get nervous. And I'm like, I do. And she goes, all right, so before you go on stage next time, say out loud, I'm excited, rather than I'm nervous about doing this. And of course, there's research behind this. And I started doing it. And I remember my wife, Ann, and I were hired to talk to Twitter. This is back when Jack Dorsey ran it. And it was all of Twitter. And it was in San Francisco, same stage that Steve Jobs would always, do the announcement on like the next iPod. So there's a giant screen behind us with us bigger than ever. And it's the biggest crowd we've ever been. And I'm just like shouting at my wife going, I'm excited to be here. Are you excited?
I've never been so excited in my life.
I've never been so more excited. Exactly. The most desperate level of excitement. And it went great and we got through it. Were we depleted afterwards? Absolutely. We went to go get Thai food and we're like, oh my God, what just happened? But because it's true for all of us. And this thing is like, imposter syndrome. I don't know anyone who doesn't. My friend, Linnea Gandhi, we had this long talk in the podcast about her imposter syndrome. And I'm like, aren't you working with Danny Kahneman on his next book? She's like, yes. And I'm like, Linnea, you're working with this is everyone else would want.
He's a Nobel Prize winner.
Nobel Prize. It's Danny Kahneman. I mean, what? Yeah. It's like, and I'm like, okay, so I'm not going to feel. And then the thing is now that I think back on the list, I'm like, oh, of course, like I these are my friends. It's like, you don't think Tina Fey gets nervous before stuff or that
she's actually talked publicly about having imposter syndrome.
Exactly. So it is just, and when you understand that it's universal, and then to your point, can you intellectually then bring in the sort of the body practice? Because this is the other thing that I don't think I realized that was so important about improvisational exercises is it's embodied learning. So it is not just the mind telling you something, it's as much the body telling your mind a thing. And the work that I did EMDR in therapy, which was very powerful and led to a lot of discovery. Cause because like my brain is going on, I am creating a story for this thing. And I am like, that is what I'm doing. And I needed to let that go. And why is my body doing a thing that I don't want it to? Mm-hmm. And as going through this, like, oh, I learned so much again by that letting go. And that's difficult for us, especially I think in a Western context, less so in an Eastern context, less so in an indigenous context, but certainly in the Western context, it's so brain.
This tendency to overestimate danger and underestimate our ability to cope with it, like that's the thing the brain is doing. And all that, we're so amazing as humans. We have language, but that means we also have assumptions and predictions and judgments and all these things that can really get us in trouble.
Yeah. And it's not easy.
No, it is not easy.
We lost our daughter, Nora, to cancer 3 years ago. And, you can have all the thoughts, you can have all the exercises that are in your arsenal, and yet there's this incredible trauma and this incredible grief. And one of the things, or maybe it's the thing that for Ann and I sort of has gotten us through, is recognizing that we can't be in isolation. Mm-hmm. So we were very public about this. I kept a caring bridge and wrote in it every single day that she was sick, and for a year after she was gone. And because we're very public people, we have lots of friends in the business who were very involved in this, who are noteworthy folks. It meant that we didn't have to sort of suffer in silence. And I think the research that I've seen around connection, around what ultimately brings happiness, around post-traumatic growth, is not isolating yourself off and allowing yourself, to ask for help, to allow people to sort of sit with you and sit with yourself inside these things. And we don't have it figured out. No one has this figured out. And these things, tragic things happen to people every day. Here's the thing I didn't realize until I talked about my trauma very openly is other people coming up and sharing the stuff they're going through that they don't talk about. And I think we do that at our detriment in every, let's just talk about productivity at a business. Like do you want a bunch of people who are wounded not talking about it? Do you think that makes your business better? I don't think so. And I think, the what we've gone through the last couple of years with COVID and everything else, and the idea of mental health being something that we have to talk about. It's like, this isn't just a nice to have anymore. Like, you're going to have to address this no matter what.
Right.
It's changed.
It's changed. It's completely changed. And I think you're so right on about all of this, and that it's no coincidence that, COVID led to this mental health tanking. And it also happened to be a time where we were very, very isolated.
Yeah.
And, there's been a lot of attention on this, the world's longest longitudinal study that came out of Harvard. Yep. Right? That they've looked at every variable there is, and time again, the thing that predicts physical and mental health and well-being is relationships.
All relationships.
And, Kelly McGonigal, who's another guest we've had, she talks about, she has a very popular TED Talk about the upside of stress. And one of the things that we always hear about the cortisol and how bad stress is for you. But what doesn't get talked about is that in addition to cortisol, stress also releases oxytocin, which is our body's tend and befriend hormone that's saying, hey, you're stressed. You need to reach out to other people. This is what's going to help mitigate that stress response. So I think there is so much wisdom in that. And doesn't that circle right back around to this idea of improv and ensemble? And maybe a key ingredient here really is the benefits you get from being in community, that it's terrifying to be in community because you're about to go be vulnerable and put yourself out on stage, and everybody might laugh at you. Well, you want them to laugh at you, but everyone might
laugh with you, maybe
laugh with you, right? But maybe they'll think what you say or do is stupid and not funny, and they'll judge you and reject you. And it's terrifying. And it's terrifying because community and connection matters so much. But when you have this yes and mentality, like nothing you do is wrong.
Because
it becomes psychologically safe.
It is. And because the other thing that we have recognized over decades and decades is the audience wants you to succeed. Yes. That is why they're there. So when I gave my talk in DC on Thursday night and I got jitters and I got up and I'm like, oh, every one of these people want me to do well. And that was a very powerful orienting thing for me to then start to tell my stories and start to talk to them and allow myself to be sort of vulnerable in that moment. And the other thing that there's a very funny thing that we've been kicking around. So Second City gets hired for storytelling a lot. And we joke about this because we're like, what do they mean? Because every time someone says, like, do you mean sales? Do you mean presence? Do you mean, what do you mean? And we get there and it's fine. And we're able, because we are very good at this. We've been in the theater. We understand.
You can improvise.
We can improvise. So my tenured professor wife, because she's now tenured, is on all these committees. And one of them is to select the head of the film and television department where she is. And she's been talking about every candidate at the end of their spiel says, at the end of the day, we're all storytellers. And Anne's like, if they say that one more time, I am going to. And I understand that because, like, okay, well, what do you mean? But when we talk about it, one of the things we talk a lot about with storytelling that we've discovered over time is start with you. What is where do you come from? Where maybe it's your parents, maybe it's your kid. And these are the stories that I always start my keynotes with. And then I start interviewing other people. I'm like, oh, they tell that story. And that's why they open with this. And I'm recognizing it's like audiences don't want your success story. Audiences want your fiasco. Audiences want your struggle. So what did you go through? And I will follow you through that. If I'm just reading my resume, that is boring. And so one aspect of storytelling is, and not everyone is going to be in a place where they can talk about the kind of traumas that I'm able to talk about for whatever reason. I think it's just true. And everyone shouldn't. But there are things about you that are true. There are things about you that maybe you have overlooked that are lovely little details about how you grew up, where you come from. And when you share those, you're creating connection and creating relationship. And to your point, the studies are just so clear on this, that is the thing that will make us happier, healthier, wealthier. And the wealth doesn't even really matter, because at the end of the day, that's not the thing that makes us happy. It's these sort of connections and the quality of those connections, So I think, like all things, it's deceptively simple. And in improvisation, we're doing as much unlearning as we are learning. So that first improv class is, don't judge yourself. Don't judge other people. Let's just like to be in this moment, walk this room, look at the other people in the eye, say something silly. They're going to say something silly. And then you realize at a certain point, you've got synchrony with these people who were strangers 3 hours ago.
Yeah, absolutely. Share the truth about what, not just your highlight reel, the truth, because as humans, as we were saying before, we all struggle, we all suffer, and it's so much more relatable. And that's where that authenticity piece comes in that we also were talking about earlier. And this idea that audiences want you to succeed, this is huge, because our assumption is that they're just waiting for us to fail.
Right.
The thing that makes people so nervous is everyone sitting out there is just waiting to insult and reject and judge, right? Everyone's going to judge me. But you're so right. Actually, audiences want you to succeed. And what a cognitive shift that could be.
At what point did you go to a movie and going, I hope the acting is terrible?
Right. No, you're right. It's pretty profound, but that's that negativity bias that we do that to protect ourselves.
Yes.
If I prepare for the likelihood that everyone's going to judge me, then I guarantee I don't fail. But that's not actually how it works. It really is more likely to set us up for failure. Exactly.
It's just
exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I came up with this little exercise after reading your book and your articles and preparing. And I've used it with several clients in therapy this week. And what I tried to do was sort of apply this idea of yes and to negative thoughts.
Okay.
And so what I mean by that, so people have all of these negative thoughts that can get in their way if they listen to them, if they treat them like reality or truth with a capital T. And, the original kind of cognitive behavioral therapy was to weigh the evidence and try to come up with a better, more realistic thought. So if I have the thought I'm a failure, I'm going to weigh all the evidence that shows what a great success I am. But it just doesn't tend to work very well, because what happens is our minds naturally go, yeah, but. Right. And we were talking in the beginning about how ineffective, right, that this can be. Mm-hmm. And it occurred to me that part of the issue here is none of my clients are having the thought, I'm a serial killer. Their thoughts are not so detached from reality. They're actually things that are grounded in some reality. They exist for a reason. So I'll give you a personal example. Mm-hmm. My thoughts tend to be in this space of kind of I'm average, I'm mediocre, I'm not special. They're not, I'm a total worthless piece of crap, but they're in this kind of bleh place. And so I could list all my accomplishments to try to talk myself out of that. And my mind would just about me. And I thought, I think I can kind of yes and this. And it's like this. It's, well, yeah. I mean, there is some truth to that, right? Because I'm not Michelle Obama or Oprah or Gandhi or any number of incredible people out there. And I went to a state school, and my parents went to state schools and got mediocre grades, and right? I think I have a fairly average IQ. So yes, I'm average under that normal curve. And I mean, the fact that I'm kind of average and have still been able to have this cool podcast and talk to cool people like Kelly Leonard and write 3 books. So it's almost just adding to the story. So it's not trying to argue against the story.
No.
It's not going down some, spiraling into a down the rabbit hole. But it's kind of this there are some kernels of truth to this, and there's a little bit more to the story. And I tried that with several of my clients, and everyone was like, wow, that's really helpful. So it's brand new.
Yeah.
So I'm curious what your thoughts are. Does that feel like it's getting at the spirit of the yes and?
I love it. I love it in the sense that, do you know Goffman's work from around 1959 where he talks about we are many selves. We have a onstage self, an offstage self, and a backstage self.
I don't know that, but I love it.
So yeah, I love it too,
Okay.
for obvious reasons in terms of the performance sort of language. But what I also love about it is this idea of we're constantly switching between those selves, and it doesn't mean that any of those are not authentic. I think the idea that the unfortunate cultural idea is an authentic self is not changing. An authentic self has got to be all pretty and good. And we're like, well, that ain't true. If we want to go catalog everything we've done, oh no, you don't want to look at all those. I mean, thank God I didn't have to grow up with social media and the way that my children have had to grow up with. So I think this idea of no, their ordinariness exists, and I too, I didn't get into Northwestern. My wife did. I had to go to Lake Forest College. But like, I did really well at Lake Forest College and I really loved it. And it helped set me on a path. So there's all those things that led me to where I am today. And guess what? You know what I'm doing today? I'm sitting here talking to another human being. I'm not in the fetal position. Or if someone's in your office, you know what they're doing? They're trying to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Yes, I'm struggling, and here I am trying to take care of myself.
Do that. Yeah. And that's that moment of the breakthroughs I've had in therapy. You know, fireworks didn't go off at all. It was more of like, oh, okay, you just pointed out something just like really that okay, that's meaningful to me, and it gives me something to sort of play with as I leave here, and I know I'm going to come back next week.
And I was even thinking that, like, you know, co-creation is part of therapy. It's a little bit of an ensemble, even though it's only generally two people, unless it's a group. Listening is obviously a huge part of therapy. Failure, you know, these are all the different things you talked about in your book that are important to improv. I mean, I see so many elements of it in the therapeutic context as well. I mean, you can kind of apply it anywhere, really.
True. If you go back maybe 4 or 5 episodes of the Getting the SEM podcast, I talked to Michael Alsey, who wrote a book called Therapeutic Improvisation. And he comes from a improvisational music background. He understands theater, includes that as well. But it was exactly in terms of establishing flow, co-creating the stories that you as a therapist, you aren't a blank slate. The idea that you could be is not realistic. So what is it that you're bringing? And then how do you listen in those moments? And this is the thing that what I've seen with great improvisers, and we've talked about people like Tina and Amy and Stephen and Steve, all great improvisers, Keegan-Michael Key, another one, is that their listening is so sharp on stage. They're not just hearing the words being said to them. They're hearing the words that aren't being said to them. And they're able to provide that. And then the audience sort of recognizes together of like, I'll give you the best example. And there's a phrase in our work calling making mistakes work for you. Two people will be improvising a scene, and I'll identify my partner as Barbara, and someone else or she will refer to herself as Jill. And then suddenly everyone, like, I know there was a mistake made, and the audience knows there was a mistake made. And so what do? I could get a cheap laugh by making fun of the fact that they misidentify themselves, or I can talk about their secret identity that just came out.
Right.
The audience loves it. Like, because they've witnessed me save this human who didn't know they needed saving.
Because they're rooting for you.
They're rooting. We're back.
Right? They want everyone to succeed.
Why did we not know this? That people actually want to do well.
Why did we not know this? All right. Well, Kelly, I could talk to you all day long. This is so fascinating. I have 2 other quick questions. Yeah. One, I'm asking for my friend Brett, who is a mental health provider and a performer, and he does the act for improv. And he wanted me to ask you, if improv were an animal, what animal would it be?
Wow. It's not a cat.
No.
And I don't think it's a dog. I was going to go for dog. It's not. Might be a marsupial, and I say that because it's a funny word.
Yeah.
But
you carry each other around.
You carry each other around. You got the pouch.
It's not a sloth because you can't be that slow.
Not that, but also those marsupials. I think they can box. So I think the other thing is they're really cute, but they can also beat you up. So you've kind of got the range
I
of
like
human
that.
existence.
I was thinking panda because they're so incredibly playful and hilarious,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't tend to beat each other up.
They don't. No,
They're more clingy.
I don't remember the
than
secret
fighting.
panda fights that were
No.
taking place in
Other than
rural
Kung Fu
parts of
Panda, maybe.
No, maybe that's not, but that's not real.
No, that is definitely not real. So tell me, what's next for the Second City, and especially when it comes to this idea of the arts speaking to science and science speaking to the arts? You must have plans.
Yeah. So one of the fun things about hosting the podcast is getting to talk to all you different interesting people. And Wendy Smith came on to talk about her book, Both and Thinking. And we had just this wonderful conversation. And afterwards, and we have a lot of mutual friends, so we sort of were familiar with each other's work. And then she's like, maybe we could do something together. I go, Wendy, like, here's the thing. Come to Chicago. We'll take you to dinner. We'll see a show. And then we'll have you watch an improv class. And I had my wife, Ann, lead an improv class. So she brought some colleagues. And it was one of those things where just everything kept we could study this. We could study this. We could study this. And her stuff is about navigating complexity. But there was also what she was saying, and I think this is deep in the work and something that we started with the Second Science Project we want to move forward with, which is when we talk about DE&I, when we talk about inclusion, so much of the exercises that we're leading in these improv classes are about getting these groups together to encounter each other. And one of the things we talked about when we were talking about the classroom, for the most part, teachers aren't doing exercises at the 5 minutes before class starts to get everyone together and oriented. And that's a mistake, I think.
Yeah, maybe they should be.
This is like what's important here. Is the work you're doing important? Is the interaction important? Do you want people participating? Then we just can't assume they're going to be ready to participate. And because these kids and anyone is walking in with their stuff, and then how do you help them sort of shed their stuff? So we're working on an article together. That was a conversation we had earlier today. And then we're talking about more studies down the line that we could do together to sort of investigate the phenomenon that happens in these improv classes when people are doing even some of this just foundational work that sets up for other kinds of lessons. So that's exciting to me. And those conversations seem to continually happen. And it's like, I've worked here for 34 years, and it's sort of like, okay, I got some more years. Let's see what else we can make.
It's so interesting. I think people will be surprised at just how many applications there are for this that go beyond just entertaining audiences. So this has been so great. Thank you so much for joining me. I know people can find you on Twitter at KL Second City. Where else can people find you? Tell us the name of your podcast again. The podcast is called Getting to Yes and you can get that both on Second City's website and WGN Radio Chicago. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on, Facebook is personal for me, so I don't do that as much. And I'm on Instagram. And so, yeah, I'm easily found. And I encourage people to, talk to us, talk to me. Like this work is ever evolving, and you never know where it's going to go. And there's so many, what's great about improv is it's no longer a thing that you only can do in Chicago, New York, and Los Angeles. I think every college has an improv troupe at this point, it seems like. So whether it's your school or whether it's a local improv, try class and just sort of see how it feels. And even it's not about you being an actor. It really isn't. It's about you being a human, and life ain't easy. And I think this stuff will help you. Great. Well, thank you, Kelly, so much.
Hey, Psychologist Off the Clock listeners. I'm going to guess that if you got to the end of this episode, that you also love to geek out about books in psychology.
If you don't know where to store all your books and people are already complaining that you talk about this book that you're reading all the time, then why don't you join us once a month to read a book together?
If you're interested in joining us, we hope you are. Just send an email to offtheclockpsych@gmail.com and we'll send you more information.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review or contributing on Patreon.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our newsletter and connecting with us on social media.
We'd like to thank our strategic consultant, Michael Harold, and our podcast production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're having a mental health emergency, dial 911. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.